Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code NATION when opening that account. Well, partner, we've been sort of prepping for this emergency show for some time, and this is the end.
It sidestepped my ski trip last weekend, so I thank the respective managers for not consummating this last weekend. This is a lot easier at home.
Well, but the Vancouver Canucks and Friday afternoon news dumps, right? You'll remember JT signed his extension the Labor Day Friday a couple of years ago. So Blake's at his home studio. I'm at my home. We still don't actually have full details of this trade, but it is JT Miller to the New York Rangers alongside Eric Brandstrom, who, of course, played a number of games for the Vancouver Canucks this year, fell out of favor with the coaching staff. Unsigned draft pick Jackson Dorrington. Dorrington is in his third year at Northeastern University, was a sixth-round pick in 2022. And in return, the Vancouver Canucks are getting Czech centerman Filip Chytil. I say minor league because he's in the AHL right now, but Victor Mancini has played NHL games with the New York Rangers this year and a protected first-round pick. And during the course of this emergency show, we're going to have the details on that protection as well as whether or not
We've got it now, Matt. Pierre LeBrun reporting the deal is top 13 protected. Top 13. So Vancouver Canucks fans are going to ask the New York Rangers to walk a pretty thin path of missing the playoffs, but not missing by too much.
That's a 2025 pick, Blake.
Don't have the year, so we're still waiting on that part of it.
So it stands to reason it would be 2025 this year. We shall, if you're going to put that kind of unique protection on it.
No retention, though. No retention of salaries confirmed. So that's the good news for the Canucks.
Oh, well, that means the Vancouver Canucks are going to save $3.5 million on the salary cap, of course, prorated for this year. But over the next couple of years as well, just on the straight swap of the two center icemen, of course, JT Miller, an $8 million player heading to the Rangers. Filip Chytil makes $4.4375. So, about $3.5 million saved for the Vancouver Canucks on the salary cap. Just on the centerman, of course, if Mancini comes up, then it changes a little bit. First things first, partner, your thoughts on the trade?
It's middling. I think disaster has been averted. I don't think anybody should be ecstatic about exactly what's happened here, but I don't think you need to be too depressed about what's happened here either. There was a chance that it got really bad, and it didn't get really bad. They have lost the guy that they intended to lose in JT Miller and no one else. They got back a center, a capable center. And they've got two other assets. We both got our phone blown up by our good friend Frankie Corrado about Victor Mancini. Ray Ferraro's been texting me too about how much he likes him. I mean, they like Mancini, and the first round pick is going to be a first round pick some way, somehow. We'll see when that occurs. But that's not the end of the world. Like they could have done worse here, and I know that's not a ringing endorsement, Matt. They could have done worse, but honestly, they could have done worse. It's not. You're not going to do backflips, but they could have done worse. That's probably the best way to describe it.
It's funny, Blake, because when JT Miller first got onto the trade radar with this management group, Jim Rutherford and Patrick Alvin, you'll remember the New York Rangers were interested in bringing him back, a one-time Rangers first-round pick who, to his own admission, was not a professional in those early years. Alain Vigneault had the stark comment to him that you're going to be a hell of an AHL player, kid, because you got a ton of talent, but you got to learn how to work and be a pro. The Rangers sent him to Tampa, of course. He comes from Tampa to Vancouver. But a couple of years ago, the Rangers take a run at JT Miller. And what was the package, Blake? It was Filip Chytil. It was Nils Lundqvist, a young defenseman at the time. And it was a first-round pick. So really, outside of the Dorrington Brandstrom additions here, you can almost see you've been working on this trade for 2 years. I agree with you for the most part, and we have been resigned, I think, over the last couple of weeks that the Vancouver Canucks were going to make a JT Miller trade. They were going to make a JT Miller trade where they probably weren't going to get $1 back for the dollar that they were sending out. And it was about minimizing the damage and going forward now in an environment where hopefully Elias Pettersson is comfortable and begins to perform, because that now becomes absolutely situation critical. It was, however, not too long ago. I mean, over the last couple of weeks, Blake, we've been looking since the deal was squashed 2 weeks ago. And actually, let's go back there for a second. 2 weeks ago today, JT Miller gathered with a bunch of his friends and Vancouver Canucks teammates at Hollyburn Athletic Club in West Vancouver. They thought they were having a send-off, a last supper for JT Miller. He thought he was going to the New York Rangers. My understanding is that Rangers owner James Dolan squashed that trade or asked Chris Drury, his general manager, to see if the Vancouver Canucks would retain salary on the deal. The Canucks said no. The deal was squashed. It looked like that might be a tough deal to recast for Chris Drury, because once your owner says no and wants retention, especially on 5 years left for Miller, it seemed like there was nowhere to go. I do wonder whether today's announcement of the salary cap going up by $7.5 million for next year, and then even more so in subsequent years, change the equation for the New York Rangers. Or maybe they just love Jackson Dorrington or feel like they can use Eric Brandstrom. But that deal was Chytil, a first, and we think prospect Adam Sikora. Well, it's, again, not too dissimilar here in Chytil, Mancini, and a protected first-round pick. You had brought up Filip Chytil's concussion history, Blake, and I think that's a big component of this deal, because this was a young centerman with size who was tracking very nicely here until some of these concussions began. He was a first-round pick in his own right, 22 goals, 23 assists for 45 points in 74 games in 22-23. He played but 10 games last year and is just 11 goals and 20 points in 41 games this year. I think it's fair to say that a lot of this trade from the Canucks side of the ledger rests on how healthy Filip Chytil is and how well he can play in the remaining 2 years that he has on his contract beyond this one.
His first legitimate rookie season, he played 75 games. Then it was down to, 60 was almost the full pull, I guess, in the pandemic shortened season. And then in the actual pandemic season, 42, which is close to full pull. But ultimately, I mean, he's not tempted the high 70s or into the 80s here in his professional NHL career. So he's got to prove durability. He might be a little bit of a lone wolf in terms of his willingness to, battle along the boards and go to the tough areas. And the Canucks need a guy like that. Does that put him in the line of fire for hits to the head going forward? Perhaps, yes. Mm-hmm. But if he can remain healthy in a more prominent role here, I mean, his ice time, if we can bring up I don't know if you're ready for it yet, the JFresh card here. He's being used in a third line capacity right now. He's going to get a little bit more ice time. Like, we can't guarantee he'll play full normal second line minutes just yet with Vancouver. Rick Tocchet might protect them a little bit and move a Suter up there to second line duty for now. But I still think his ice time will probably go up if he can stay healthy. There's the potential for his usage to mean that he gets some more points. We'll see.
Well, let's face it, at this stage of the game, he's a third line center, and he would have to get back to playing like he was a couple of years ago to be viewed as more. He may play second line center ultimately for the Vancouver Canucks, as you outlined. And really, it seems like Jim Rutherford was setting the market up for this in that interview with Gary Mason of the Globe and Mail on Tuesday, where he talked about we may not even get a second line and number two center back, and are going to have to go about taking some of the component parts and some of our other assets and going out and finding that profile of player. He does have size. We know this coaching staff loves size. 6'2", 208 pounds, 25. Will play the rest of this season at 25 before turning 26 in training camp next year. So you get 6 years younger than JT Miller at that position. Again, mentioned he's got the 2 years left after this one, not the 5 that Miller has. Let's get to Victor Mancini for a second, Blake, because an interesting story there, and I'm going to get you to fill us in on some of the particulars, but a 22-year-old right shot defenseman, he'll be 23 in late May, a fifth-round pick, 159th overall in the 2022 entry draft. He's a Michigander, so another American coming here, played his college hockey at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, is just a second-year pro, turned pro at the end of last year, got in a handful of games with the AHL's Hartford Wolfpack. That is where he has spent most of his time this season, has 13 points in 30 AHL games, has 5 points in 15 NHL games.
Yeah.
You look at his Hockey DB page, though, he's not much of a scorer. The points have not followed this guy. In fact, he went 2 full seasons at Nebraska Omaha without scoring a single point or a single goal. What he has is size, and we know how much they love the big defenseman. This is 6'3", 229 as a right shot who can play the left side. You got to think that Adam Foote likes that profile.
I think he's got in their mind's eye, they are undoubtedly hoping he becomes Tyler Myers-esque, and not early Tyler Myers, Calder Trophy Tyler Myers, more like the Myers that you see now, that yes, he's big, yes, he's mobile, but it doesn't necessarily lead to points. Now, Myers has picked up a decent amount of points this year, but that's not how you think of Tyler Myers, as offensive minded, right? But mobile enough that you create space for yourself and can make the first pass and keep things simple. And, that's a nice player to have. If Tom Wielander comes in and is the mobile right shot defenseman that picks up a few more points, and again, he's not prolific point getter, but I think it's reasonable to hope that you could get a 40-point season out of Wielander at some point. This guy could be the more stationary, not stationary, the more conservative of the right shot defenseman at the Vancouver Canucks. And to boot, he started his pro career in Sweden with Frölunda. He played on the left side a lot of the nights in Sweden. So he's capable of moving over if you all of a sudden had, can you believe this, man? Too many right shot defensemen. We'll cross those bridges when we get to them.
I mean, I think you're hoping he develops into a second pair guy. I think you have to resign yourself that you're probably adding a big, thick, third pair right shot guy who is not bereft of puck skills, but whose whole job is to keep the puck out of his net. If any kind of offense comes, if he becomes such a good defender that you like him even more than what we have seen thus far, again, going on 23 in the spring, then maybe he elevates and becomes a second pair defenseman for you long term. But for the moment, I think you're looking at a third pair guy that you're hopeful has the profile, has some of the skills to move on up onto the second pair. As you mentioned, our friend Frank Corrado, TSN hockey analyst, joins our daily show on Wednesdays, quite likes this player. So it could be quite interesting. The other thing that is super weird about Victor Mancini, Blake, I cannot remember too many American players who went over to the Swedish Junior League to play. And yet that is what Victor Mancini did in 2019-20, and again the next year playing for the Frölunda Junior program in Sweden, as opposed, and this is after playing some in the USHL with the US National Team Development Program, and then with 2 different USHL franchises. So a very unique path there for Victor Mancini that you don't see a lot on Hockey DB cards.
No, it is very unique, and yet it clearly helped some of his development, and his dad was a longtime college coach, so he's got the pedigree. You can bet he got some off official ice coaching from dad, who apparently was integral in his development as well. So Canucks have already got one hockey dad in Quinn Hughes and his dad, from that are in the business, if you will. Probably doesn't hurt to have another one. 2 super chats in the chat already on YouTube. Tyler Gibbs of both of them. Could we have gotten something a little more here, guys? And then followed up with another one. Thank you, Tyler. Now, do they still trade Petey?
Mm-hmm.
Matt,
so
I think
gotten a little more. The answer to that is yes. If you were moving JT Miller earlier than this, as it turns out, whatever happened on Grey Cup Sunday here in Vancouver against the Nashville Predators back in November, where there was some sort of incident after JT Miller got benched and then later took a 10-game leave of absence. At that point, the die was cast. At that point, JT Miller was on borrowed time as a Vancouver Canuck. The Vancouver Canucks had a serious problem on their hands with regards to how JT Miller got along with Elias Pettersson and perhaps others in the organization. We have seen an extraordinary set of circumstances since then, with both Rick Tocchet and Quinn Hughes talking about the rift between the two Canucks top centermen. Tocchet even saying, request them, media, please talk to them about it. Of course, both of them flatly denied it, even called it a media construct, and that was laid bare as naked and just 100% dishonest this week by Jim Rutherford, who chronicled a long-standing feud between the players that would go dormant and then fester again. So from a team chemistry standpoint, and this has really been the discussion for the last couple of weeks here, the Vancouver Canucks were boxed into a corner, forced to make the best deal they could for JT Miller. Not only do you get some assets back, but in this case, you're getting some cap space back, as we mentioned, $3.5 million over the next couple of years. And then, of course, the entirety of it is $8 million going forward. And you try and make good and make do with the best you can. You hope that chemistry improves. You hope that maybe there's a sum of the parts solution here as you vie for a playoff spot with the Calgary Flames and others right by the Western Conference playoff bar. And then, of course, you go ahead and hope to use that $3.5 million in savings wisely going forward.
Well, this year is really important to underline here, Matt. This year, after the trade, the Canucks have got their cap space. That means they can fit an annual cap hit. They could acquire tomorrow, trade a prospect tomorrow for a $6.7 million player. If they waited till the deadline, it almost doubles somehow, according to Puckpedia. They could fit a $12.2 million player in at the trade deadline. So that's a heck of a lot of cap space that the Canucks can shop with. And you might think, yeah, but what do they give up? Now they've got that second first-round pick. With 2 first-round picks, could the Canucks now do a Filip Hronek-esque trade and go and get a player with term for one of their 2 first-round picks? And that's, to me, very interesting, without flinching, without having to send much salary the other way at all. They could really pick up a player. If they attached Niels Höglander to a first-round pick, like allow your brain to explode here at the kind of action the Canucks could get into over the next 5 to 6 weeks. To me, that might be the biggest win here of the trade, is the cap space in the here and now. If the Canucks really do believe they can get back on track and win a bunch of games here, make it into the playoffs, they could be a much better team as of the trade deadline.
Yeah, and you'll remember last year they wanted very much to add Jake Guentzel and did not have the cap space to do it at the deadline. That started this year. That's one of the reasons why this year we did all of this accruing of cap space that Patrick Allvin was assembling by sending players down to Abbotsford on off days in order to gain those little micro bits of cap space. You're quite right. They got 5 weeks here before the NHL trade deadline. I think if the team puts itself in a position where it's still right there in the playoffs, or perhaps even more firmly in the playoffs than they stand right now, which is a little bit out, 1 point behind Calgary, then yes, then it could be put to good use there. We should also not discount, though, Blake, that there may be a longer-term view here. For starters, you're now on the market for a top 2 centerman. Yep. That is an exceedingly difficult piece to acquire in the National Hockey League. They don't often come up for trade. To buy them on the open free agent market is quite expensive. So they may be looking at using that cap space differently. And of course, if they fall out of the playoffs from here or fall further from here, Brock Besser, Pius Suter, some of their own rentals might be going out by the deadline, and we might be looking at a Vancouver Canucks team that has significantly more prospects and picks on the market in the summer for this player. Let's just for a moment here, Blake, go over JT Miller's history here in Vancouver, because it was an absolute stunner in June of 2019, right here in Vancouver at the entry draft at Rogers Arena, when then general manager Jim Benning, we thought we were headed towards some degree of rebuild, when Jim Benning, the Vancouver Canucks general manager, traded a minor league goalie, a third-round pick at that 2019 draft, and a conditional first-round pick in 2020 to the Tampa Bay Lightning for JT Miller. Tampa was Miller's second stop. He had worn out his welcome with the Rangers. He really wasn't maximizing his potential as a first-round pick with size and speed and tools at all in Tampa. He was playing down lineup on a very good team, was coming off a 13-goal, 34 assists, 47 points. He was a half-point per game player. Many of us exploded, said this is just absolutely terrible for the Canucks, particularly since Tampa was dealing from a position of weakness. They had cap issues and decided that JT Miller was the guy to go. Well, he turns into one of the best trades the Vancouver Canucks has ever made. 404 games played as a Canuck, 437 points as a Vancouver Canuck. He is one of only 2 Vancouver Canucks in history to average more than a point per game in his Canucks tenure. He is only behind Pavel Bure on that score. Elias is just shy of that right now. Elias may one day, and even Quinn has a chance to get to be a point per game player as a Canuck. But in history, there are 2 of them, and JT Miller is one. And I can very much understand from the perspective of fans, particularly those who love to chant along with Al Murdoch at Rogers Arena, JT Miller, that this is a sad ending, that it came to this, that he and Elias Pettersson and he and others in the organization couldn't work out their differences and make him a Canuck long-term and forge forward, especially coming off the 109-point Pacific Division Championship season last year.
Matt, since he joined the Vancouver Canucks, since JT Miller joined, 437 points. He is 11th in the National Hockey League from the moment that he joined the Vancouver Canucks. The guy just behind him is a guy named Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
The guy behind him, Kyle Connor, William Nylander, Sebastian Aho, Alexander Barkov. We're talking brand name players here. Still a good Steven Stamkos, Zibanejad, Huberdeau, ahead of Sam Reinhart, ahead of all of them. That's the kind of player that JT Miller was for the Vancouver Canucks.
He was an all-star player. I mean, he's this shy from being an all-league player, all-league 13, if you will, if you were putting together those clubs over the last.
And even points per game. Even if you went to points per game, 1.08 points per game as a Canuck. That's 15th in the NHL since he's joined the Vancouver Canucks.
Alas, it comes to this, though, because of JT Miller.
Yep.
In any line of work, you have to collaborate and cooperate with your teammates and set aside personal differences and make it work and get along at some level. And I am struck by what Brad Richardson, the former Canuck, said about his 17-game tenure at the end of the season a few years ago, where he pulled Miller aside and said, you cannot ride Elias Pettersson like that. You're going to lose the kid. And sure enough, he did. So from that standpoint, a great all-time Canuck is going out here. And Filip and Vincent Mancini and this first-round pick, whomever it may be, and that's if they keep it, will have an awfully long way to go to be JT Miller. We have fired a Surrey Mitsubishi poll question at Sekeres Price, certainly on X, if not on YouTube as well. I'm sure Mike is busy working away there. He's got a Shane Gillis concert to go to tonight, so Mike will get you out for that. Do you like the JT Miller trade? Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres Price on Twitter and on X and on YouTube.
The Rangers are in Boston tomorrow night. It is expected that JT Miller will play for the Rangers in that game. The question will be for Chytil, who's got to go a little bit farther here with the Vancouver Canucks on their way home after this one. When is the first time that we're going to see Filip Chytil in a Vancouver Canucks uniform? You'd think they would try to get him in ASAP. Sunday at home to Detroit. I mean, that seems fairly doable at this point. They get the benefit of the Rangers do of not missing a beat with Chytil gone, and the Vancouver Canucks do have to play the Dallas Stars, of course, without JT Miller or Filip Chytil in the lineup.
Yeah. Our friends at Surrey Mitsubishi have a special program for the Sekeres Price audience. They have dedicated a representative, Jessica, who's going to help you with their in-house financing program. If you've been turned down for financing at other dealerships, whatever it may be, bad credit, negative equity on your current car, Jessica's going to apply this special program, do all she can to get you Approved for financing at Surrey Mitsubishi. Email Jessica at surreymitsubishi.com. Mention Sekeres Price. Some conditions apply. Surrey Mitsubishi, 13820 104th Avenue. And yes, the Canucks are about to drop the puck in Dallas to face the Stars, looking for a season-tying season best-tying fourth consecutive win here, Blake. That's the other thing that's going on here, right? They are playing some of their best hockey of the season over the last week, and doing so with JT Miller in the lineup and pulling his own weight. And so, needless to say, it's going to be somewhat of a neutered lineup for the Canucks tonight against the Stars, with JT having been scratched, left the arena, and heading
one other 4 game to tell you about. We've already mentioned this before, but it's different now. The Four Nations face-off is in 18 days. The USA versus Sweden. And if Elias Pettersson lines up to take a face-off against JT Miller, would you not expect that the thought crosses JT Miller's mind of, you got me kicked off the Vancouver Canucks? And hey, who knows? JT Miller might think he's in a way better spot now. You can bet he's a New York kind of guy, but there's still you won the battle. You got me moved off a team. There might be a little jam there.
I think the pride runs deep with that one. I can really hope the two coaches see fit enough to put them out for the opening face-off. I can only imagine what JT is going to say to Elias. I imagine he is going to play him most physically. The good news for Canucks fans is now they have a rooting interest in that, right? It is pretty clear cut who you're for. You're for Team Sweden, or at least you're for Elias Pettersson against JT Miller. Of course, Hughes still playing for Team USA. And getting back to Tyler's question, now did they still trade Elias? The conventional wisdom is they're going to give it a shot here to see how Elias does without his rival, without his foil here in the lineup. But Blake, I am still not convinced that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin have ever viewed Elias Pettersson as the number one center and centerpiece on a championship team. We have just heard too much from Canucks management about Elias, about the maturity, about the way he prepares, for me to believe that they're completely done listening on him. I suspect he will be here through the trade deadline, because if he's not, effectively the Canucks are punting on the season after this return on Miller. But will he be here on July 1st when his no move clause kicks in? That to me is still an unanswered question.
Tyler has so many
than not, but let's see how he plays here over the final 32 games of the NHL regular season and playoffs, should they get there.
Tyler keeps super chatting, so we'll keep reading them. Could we have asked about Trocheck? Would have loved him.
So
I'm sure all the names were asked about by the Vancouver Canucks. But Vincent Trocheck has the full no move, and they're not so disillusioned with him. I don't think that they dared to approach him about waiving that no move clause.
He's got 4 more years after this one at 5.6. He's having a heck of a year. He's got the full no move, and he's JT's best friend. They grew up together in Pittsburgh. Someone told me that Vincent Trocheck and JT Miller were absolutely salivating over the prospect of getting to play with each other in the National Hockey League. So, no, the Rangers drew a firm line. The Rangers knew the predicament the Vancouver Canucks were in, and they weren't going to bail them out. Particularly since, they were the ones a couple of years ago thinking Chytil, Lundqvist, and a first would get it done then. And sure enough, they got their man, just exchanged Lundqvist for Mancini a couple of years later. So, all right, that'll do it for the Sekeres Price special emergency show. JT Miller traded to the New York Rangers for Filip, Victor Mancini, and a first. He goes with Eric Brandstrom and Jackson Dorrington. As always, our show, a presentation of Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code NATION when opening that account. Jeff Paterson will have rink-wide Vancouver after the game against Dallas tonight. I'm sure more coverage there, and we'll talk to you on Monday